Hello, this is Maya Ellison, and welcome to Still Unanswered. Today, we go back to a day that changed a family and a community forever. June 4th, 2010, Skyline Elementary, Northwest Portland. A science fair, a school open to parents, and a 7-year-old boy named Kyron Horman who never made it to his second-grade classroom. He was 7. He loved frogs. He stood proudly in front of a red-eyed tree frog project in the last photo we have of him. This episode is about timeline, about gaps, about what investigators did and didn't know, and, importantly, about the child at the center of all of this. Kyron was a kid, not a case file. With me is Dr. Lucas Herrera, a criminologist who's consulted on cold cases across the West Coast and helped with digital reanalysis projects. Lucas, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Maya. It's an honor to be here. I'll just say up front, this one has always struck me as particularly painful because of the combination of space, time, and community proximity. You have a small school, an open event, and then a long absence window. That's a recipe for frustration for investigators and for families.
Yeah, and before we get deep into evidence and theories, I want to bring Kyron back into the room. The reporting describes him as shy, sweet, curious about science. He wore glasses. On that morning, he was in a CSI t-shirt, dark cargo pants, sneakers. Lucas, when investigators talk about victims, particularly children, they often start with vulnerability of circumstance. With Kyron, what stands out to you? Yeah, and before we get deep into evidence and theories, I want to bring Kyron back into the room.
2 things. 1, age. 7-year-olds are naturally trusting of adults they know. They're less likely to be suspicious. 2, setting. Skyline that morning was not a typical lockdown school environment. Parents were in the building for portfolio day and a science fair. So a child who might otherwise be in class on a regular schedule was moving through a space where the normal controls weren't in place. When you combine those, trust and a looser environment, it creates opportunities for both accidental and intentional harm. Not to sound clinical, but those are the vulnerabilities to note.
Right. Vulnerability plus opportunity. Let's reconstruct June 4th as tightly as we can. I'm going to walk us through the timeline, and Lucas, I want your reactions after each chunk. First, the morning. Terri Horman, Kyron's stepmother, drives Kyron and baby Kiara to Skyline instead of the bus. They arrive around 8 to 8:15 a.m. Terri helps Kyron set up his red-eyed tree frog project. Multiple witnesses place them there at about 8:15. Terri later says she left the school around 8:45 a.m., last seeing Kyron walking down the hallway toward his classroom.
Okay. That's consistent with press accounts and public documents. The fact that multiple people saw them at 8:15 is important. It establishes Kyron was on campus and with an adult that morning. The issue becomes last definitive sighting versus the time the teacher marks him absent. And we already know, in practice, definitive gets fluid when memories and stress enter the picture.
And that's where the first problem appears. At some point after Terri leaves, between 8:45 and roughly 9, Kyron does not arrive in his math class. His teacher, Christina Porter, marks him absent for the morning. There's no confirmed sighting of Kyron after Terri's claimed last sighting. Some students later say they might have seen him near the school around 9 a.m., but those memories are uncertain. No security cameras to verify. Lucas, how do investigators treat that kind of uncertainty in a timeline?
They have to treat it very carefully. Memories from different observers can be inconsistent, especially when the event is only reconstructed after a disappearance. Investigators will try to corroborate with physical evidence, surveillance, receipts, vehicle logs, but in a case like this, those tools weren't available on campus. So they map statements against known timestamps: when Terri says she left, when the teacher marked the roll, when witnesses report seeing Kyron. Without objective data, everything becomes probabilistic. You end up with ranges, not points. That's not ideal when minutes matter.
Exactly. And those minutes, they add up. Let's move into what happened after. Terri's stated timeline for the rest of the morning includes errands, a Fred Meyer trip for a prescription, stops at a dry cleaner and a craft store, then a period she describes as driving around to soothe Kiara between about 10:10 and 11:39 a.m. There's a verified presence at a gym by 11:39 and workout until about 12:40. Then she posts photos of Kyron at 1:21 p.m. on Facebook, at a time when no one yet realizes he's missing. Investigators later refer to roughly 90 minutes, closer to 95 minutes in some reporting, as an unaccounted gap. Lucas, from a forensics and investigative perspective, how consequential is a gap like that?
A gap of 90-95 minutes is very consequential on two levels. Practically, it's a window where a child could be taken, moved, or handled in ways that leave little trace. Forensically, if you don't have CCTV, receipts, or multiple independent corroborations tied to exact timestamps, that period becomes a focal point for investigators. They'll try to reconstruct travel routes, phone pings, gas station video, anything to tighten that window. In Kyron's case, parts of Terri's errands are corroborated by surveillance and receipts, but that particular span is described publicly as loosely accounted for. Investigators treat it as an area needing scrutiny. In Kyron's case, parts of Terri's errands are corroborated by surveillance and receipts, but that particular span is described publicly as loosely accounted for.
And, of course, that scrutiny gets amplified because later that summer, there's the allegation Terri tried to hire a landscaper to kill Kaine, Kyron's father. The landscaper tells investigators Terri solicited him months before. Police staged a sting. Terri's behavior after Kyron's disappearance, an affair, hundreds of texts, sexual photos with a family friend, doesn't help public perceptions. We're going to spend a lot of time on that thread, but before we do, I want to finish the day's timeline. Kyron is noticed missing around 3:30 p.m. when the family walks to the bus stop and the boy never gets off the bus. The school secretary checks and finds he's been marked absent all day, and the family calls the police. Searches begin in the afternoon. Lucas, that 7-hour window from last claimed sighting to discovery, how does that shape search operations?
It makes them exponentially harder. Searches are most effective in the hours immediately after a disappearance. With children, search theory emphasizes that the faster you act, the better the chance of finding a live child. Here, you have a long delay, whether because of administrative assumptions or the nature of the event. That means potential evidence on or near campus could be contaminated by visitors from the morning's open event. It means scent trails for dogs degrade, and it broadens the radius you must check because you can't confidently say where he was last seen. So the search becomes larger, more resource-intensive, and more likely to miss narrow but critical indicators.
Which is what happened. The search becomes massive, the largest in Oregon history at the time, with over 1,300 searchers, cadaver dogs, FBI involvement. They search a 2-mile radius, then look at Sauvie Island and other places later. But, and this is crucial, no verified physical trace of Kyron is recovered. No glasses, no backpack, nothing. Lucas, when searches that size turn up no trace, what hypotheses remain plausible?
The absence of physical evidence narrows and widens certain hypotheses simultaneously. It makes scenarios where a child was taken in a vehicle and moved out of the search radius more plausible. It leaves open the possibility of an accidental death followed by a cover-up, but that requires complex behavior from whoever was involved. It doesn't rule out stranger abduction, although stranger abductions from school during daylight and with parent traffic are comparatively rare. From an investigative perspective, every theory must be tested, but the lack of remains or items certainly shifts emphasis towards scenarios involving movement away from the immediate grounds during that morning or the hypothesis of concealment.
There's also the school's open campus that morning. Doors were effectively open. Parents and community were moving around without sign-in systems or cameras. That lack of a controlled environment is something we keep circling back to. Did it create the conditions for a stranger to walk in and take a child? Or did it obscure the later movements of someone the child knew?
Both are theoretically possible. The open environment increases opportunities for an outsider to blend in, but again, stranger abductions from within a school setting, especially when the school is populated, are statistically less common. More often, perpetrators are known to the child. The open campus also complicates accountability. If staff don't realize someone is missing because they assume the child went home with a parent, that procedural gap can be exploited intentionally or can simply lead to an unintentional, tragic delay in response.
Let's talk about the family next. The initial family response was a written statement on June 9, then a joint press conference on June 11 with Kaine, Desiree, Kyron's mother, Terri, and others. But the family later fractures. Desiree becomes publicly convinced Terri knows what happened. Kaine grows suspicious, obtains restraining orders, moves out with Kiara. Terri becomes the central person of interest in public discussion. Lucas, how common is it for investigations into missing children to shift so sharply toward a family member? And what ought listeners to understand about that shift?
It happens with some frequency. Statistically, children who are harmed are more often injured by people they know than by strangers, so investigators naturally look inward: family, close acquaintances, caregivers early on. But there's a difference between a person of interest and a charged suspect. Investigators will intensify scrutiny where there are unexplained time gaps, motive, opportunity, or suspicious behavior. Publicly, though, this can be devastating. Allegations, even insinuations, shape media narratives and community perception. The key point for listeners is this: a focus in an investigation does not equate to legal guilt. The absence of charges in Kyron's case speaks to the limits of available evidence, despite strong suspicions.
And yet, the public narrative around Terri hardened quickly. There was the alleged murder-for-hire plot against Kyron, the affair days after Kyron disappeared, and reports of polygraphs and inconsistent cooperation. Terri has denied involvement, later appearing on Dr. Phil to say she was told not to speak and that she believes a stranger took Kyron. The family's anger is real, and Desiree has been relentless in calling out Terri. Legally, though, Terri was never charged. Lucas, when public anger and private grief collide like this, how does that affect an investigation?
It can have mixed effects. On one hand, family pressure and public media attention keep a case alive. They push agencies to allocate resources and maintain investigative momentum. On the other hand, intense media scrutiny can compromise an investigation if witnesses are influenced, if jurors or potential informants are prejudiced, or if police feel public pressure to act prematurely. Investigators must balance transparency with preserving the integrity of the case. In the Kyron matter, the public's fixation on Terri both propelled scrutiny and complicated public understanding of what investigators actually could prove.
I want to pause and let the listeners feel what that ambiguity means for the people who loved Kyron. Desiree described her life as torture, knowing her son is likely gone, but not knowing where, how, or by whom. Kaine pursued restraining orders and sole custody battles. Kiara grew up without answers. That ambiguous loss is a trauma unto itself. Lucas, as someone who's consulted with families and investigators, what do you see as the human toll of unresolved cases like this?
The human toll is long and layered. Ambiguous loss, where there's no confirmation of death or resolution, interrupts normal grief. Families cannot complete mourning rituals. Every anniversary, every unrelated court case, every sighting report reopens wounds. It can destroy marriages, fracture families, and create a lifetime of suspicion and searching. For investigators, that human element is sometimes a double burden. They carry the responsibility to find answers, but they also must manage the expectations and pain of families who want immediate justice. It's an agonizing mismatch at times.
It really is. Let's go deeper into the evidence and the missing pieces. One consistent public talking point is no physical evidence. No glasses, no backpack, no clothing, not even a single trace that has been confirmed publicly. Investigators scaled back large physical searches about 9 days later and shifted to a criminal probe. Over the years, tips came in, thousands, but none led to a public resolution. Lucas, what do thousands of tips really mean in a case like this? Is it hope? Is it noise?
It's both. Tip lines in high-profile cases gather everything from credible leads to the misremembered sighting from a different state. Investigators have to triage. DNA or forensic evidence takes precedence. Then, credible corroborations with timestamps, surveillance, or witness consistency. Many tips are dead ends, but occasionally a single, seemingly small tip, a license plate fragment remembered by a neighbor, a gas station receipt, a phone record, can be the pivot. So you respect every tip, but you also develop a triage workflow to separate signal from noise.
That triage becomes harder when the initial hours are lost. Okay, we need to confront the theories listeners are likely waiting for. 1. Stranger abduction at the science fair or near campus. 2. Someone the child knew was involved, a non-stranger abduction or accident and cover-up. 3. More organized criminal involvement, which, to be clear, has less public support. Lucas, can you walk us through, analytically, the strengths and weaknesses of each theory given the public record?
Sure. Stranger abduction. Strengths: open campus, a lot of adult traffic, no cameras. Weaknesses: daytime abductions from a populated school are rare, and there were no confirmed witnesses of an unknown adult leaving with Kyron, nor vehicle descriptions that panned out. Non-stranger involvement. Strengths: statistically likelier in child harm cases. Explains the lack of witnessed abduction if Kyron trusted the person. Weaknesses: requires either an effective cover-up or immediate movement off campus that left no trace. Also, family members and acquaintances were scrutinized heavily, yet no prosecutable evidence was secured. Accident and cover-up. Strengths: plausible explanation for no traces if a body was concealed. Weaknesses: a successful, airtight cover-up involving multiple actors for years is harder than people imagine. Human memory and behavior leak. Organized crime/trafficking. Strengths: can explain disappearing without trace. Weaknesses: there's no credible link to trafficking networks or subsequent sightings. Investigators haven't emphasized it publicly. In short, each theory has explanatory power and corresponding evidentiary gaps.
That last point. People imagine airtight cover-ups, but human systems leak, is important. Now let's shift to systems. What failed? Or at least, what made this harder than it needed to be? I want to talk school policy, attendance protocols, visitor sign-in, lack of internal surveillance, the open-door culture during an event. Lucas, from an institutional perspective, what are clear missed opportunities?
First, immediate attendance verification. If a child is seen earlier in the day, there should be a confirmation process when they don't appear in class, especially on event days. Second, visitor control. Even during family events, basic sign-in and identification can help later investigations. Third, surveillance. Interior or exterior cameras provide objective timestamps. None of these guarantee prevention, but they reduce uncertainty. In Kyron's case, the absence of these systems created ambiguity that investigators then had to untangle after the fact.
And the consequences ripple outward. Parents feel less safe, school districts revisit policies expensive to implement, communities argue about privacy versus security. We also need to talk about the legal and ethical dimension of accusation without charge. Terri has been publicly treated as guilty by many, including members of Kyron's own family. But legally, she was never charged in Kyron's disappearance. Lucas, how should a public community navigate the line between suspicion and presumption of innocence in a case like this?
Carefully. Families have the right to speak their pain and suspicions. The public has the right to ask tough questions. But there's a civic duty to avoid hard-casting guilt without prosecutable evidence. False assumptions can ruin lives and divert resources. At the same time, silence or dismissal of a family's concerns can feel like complicity. The healthiest path is to support investigative processes while acknowledging the emotional need for accountability, but not to substitute rumor for evidence.
Listeners, this is hard territory. Now let's step into a slightly more hopeful space, technology and the recent digital re-examination. In 2025, Multnomah County began digitizing thousands of pieces of evidence with the expressed aim of getting fresh eyes and tech into play. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has been involved in reviews. Lucas, from your experience, what can digitization and modern forensic tools realistically offer to a decade-plus-old case?
They can offer a lot, but not miracles. Digitization does three practical things. It prevents evidence sitting on shelves where it is underused. It enables cross-referencing across thousands of documents. And it allows computational tools, timeline builders, geospatial mapping, pattern matching, to find correlations humans may miss. Modern DNA methods can retest items with more sensitive assays, the sort that weren't available in 2010. Cell phone forensics and metadata analysis have matured, so some patterns of movement can be reconstructed even from old records if they were preserved. Behavioral analysis can spot inconsistencies that, when coupled with new corroboration, become leads. But, and this is crucial, digitization only helps if there's something in the material that's been overlooked or that modern methods can extract. It's not a guarantee of prosecution.
So, it's about increasing the probability of finding something useful, not magic. Do you know of cold cases where digitization directly led to breakthroughs?
Yes, There have been several cases where digitizing old reports and using geospatial temporal analysis revealed patterns, like a recurring vehicle in multiple incident reports that had been missed. In others, resampling of preserved evidence with modern DNA techniques identified profiles that tracked down family members or associates, eventually linked to a crime. The FBI and many local agencies have had successes, but outcomes depend on the quality of what's been preserved and whether physical evidence remains.
Listeners, I want to be careful here. There have been public announcements that the case has been digitized and that new reviews are being done. That's important news. It means the file is alive, but it doesn't mean we have answers tonight. Before we close, we should ask, what would a realistic next step look like if you were advising investigators, Lucas?
Prioritize integration. First, full digital cross-reference of statements against timestamps, school logs, store surveillance, phone metadata. Second, re-examine physical evidence with modern assays, if there are any items that could yield DNA or trace evidence. Third, follow up targeted re-interviews with witnesses focused on discrepancies that tech flags, interviews that are open-ended and trauma-informed. Fourth, re-evaluate geographic priorities with GIS tools, movement models that combine traffic patterns, likely vehicle speeds, and accessible routes for that morning. Finally, public outreach with specificity. Release a narrowed list of precisely what kind of information would be most helpful: a car make, partial license plate, a specific time range, to concentrate tips into actionable forms.
Specificity over broad pleas. And for the public who might still hold suspicions or memories, what would you say to them about coming forward?
If you think you have anything, even a small detail, come forward. Don't judge your memory. Sometimes a small fact, like a color or a license plate fragment, can be the missing link. But if you're telling a story that's rumor or secondhand gossip, be cautious. Provide what you know and allow investigators to vet it. Don't circulate unverified allegations that can harm people and hinder an investigation.
Good. Lucas, before we wrap, I want to ask something harder. When a case goes unresolved for so long, public narratives ossify. Someone is guilty in the court of public opinion, or the incident becomes an emblem for broader fears about school safety. How should journalists, investigators, and podcasters like me responsibly cover long unsolved cases?
With humility and restraint. Present what is documented and what is alleged, clearly distinguishing between the two. Recenter the person who vanished as a human being, a child, not just as an engine of speculation. Avoid sensationalism that prizes drama over clarity. Push for transparency from agencies, but also respect investigative boundaries. And always remember that families live in the afterlife of your coverage. Your work can help, but it can also deepen their trauma if done irresponsibly.
I appreciate that. Listeners, as we finish, Kyron would be in his early 20s now, but he's still listed as missing. There is no public confirmation of a body, no legal closure. His mother, Desiree, continues to campaign and to ask for answers. His father has continued to press. The case file has been digitized. Investigators say it's active. We end as we began, with questions that refuse to settle. Lucas, any final thought you want to leave the audience with?
Just this. Unresolved cases are not inert. They're alive in memory, in families, and in communities. Technology and fresh analysis can shift the balance of probabilities, but they need public patience and precise help. If you have anything at all that could be connected to June 4, 2010, bring it forward. Small details can be the hinge of a breakthrough. And remember Kyron as a child, curious about frogs, the image of him beside that science project, not merely as a headline.
Thank you, Lucas. To the listeners, if you have information about Kyron, contact the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office tip line. Links and numbers will be in the episode notes. If you're a teacher, a parent, or a school administrator, think about the attendance and security protocols at your school. Sometimes policy changes come from painful examples. Finally, and this is for everyone, hold your assumptions lightly. People in these stories are grieving. They're human. This has been Still Answered. I'm Maya Ellison. Thank you for listening with care.